Well, the Dodgers lost the game, and you know what that means. That's right. It's time for Everything is Dave Roberts' Fault. Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, we're going to talk about some of the decisions Dave Roberts made and maybe throw out some possible reasons why maybe they weren't the worst decisions any manager has ever made in the history of managerial decisions. So that's what's on tap. So let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Dodger fans. This is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now, and then you'll never miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time listening or watching, my name is Jeff Snider. My co-host is Vince Samperio. We're doing a split episode today, so I will be with you for the first half. Vince will be with you for the second half. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans just like you, and we've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we're not quite insiders, but we bring you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. Today's episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Use code Locked On at checkout. All right, let's talk about the Dodgers. The Dodgers lost this first game of the Cardinals series 7-6. They were down 6-1 at one point. Second straight game, they've found themselves down by 5 runs. And second straight game that they've battled back. This time they got within 6-5 and had bases loaded and nobody out. And they couldn't push a run across. Somebody who I believe is in the witness protection program, which is why he's going by the name Packy Naughton. You'd think they'd pick something that sounds like a real name, but I don't know. I'm not a federal marshal. You ever seen The Fugitive? That's a good movie. Anyway, something named Packy Naughton came in and got Max Muncy to hit a shallow fly out, Hanser Alberto to hit a shallow fly out, and then Cody Bellinger to strike out. The Dodgers didn't get the tying run across, and David Price then gave up a run. So Freddie Freeman's home run in the top of the ninth just pulled them back with him one, and they couldn't tie the game or take the lead, and they lose this game. Two big decisions that people quibbled with. It happens a lot when you have a preconceived notion that Dave Roberts is a terrible manager. Every move he makes that doesn't work out, you think is a terrible move. I am on record, and I'll say it again. I don't think there are very many managerial decisions that are right or wrong. I believe most of them fall in what I call the 55-45 decisions, where you have a 55% chance of being quote unquote right. If you do this, you have a 45% chance if you do that. So you go, ideally, the goal is to have as many 55% decisions as possible. But even then, when you make the quote unquote right call, you're wrong 45% of the time. So one of the ones, I don't know which one to talk about. Let's talk about the Max Muncy decision first. The Dodgers had basically nobody out, and Trayce Thompson scheduled to come up against right-hander Fernandez of the Cardinals. Fernandez was struggling with his control, had just walked a couple batters in a row. Dave Roberts went to Max Muncy to pinch hit. The Cardinals countered by bringing in Packy Naughton, and Max Muncy got a 2-0 count. I think it was 3-1, and he eventually flied out, not quite deep enough to center to score the run from third. Freddie Freeman was on third, not deep enough to score him. And there were 5 options in that situation. You let Trayce Thompson hit, you pinch hit for him with Muncy, you pinch hit for him with Lux, you pinch hit for him with Jake Lamb, or you pinch hit for him with Zach McKinstry. All 4 pinch hit options are left-handed. And so there's no platoon advantage to any of them. We can cross McKinstry off the list right away. Dave Roberts knew that Packy Naughton was warming up. Packy Naughton was coming in the game no matter what, even if the Dodgers had left Trayce Thompson up. And so that might be an argument in favor of letting Trayce Thompson hit, because then he has the platoon advantage. Well, Trace Thompson's strikeout rate against left-handed pitchers since he came back to the Dodgers is 43%. He strikes out a lot against lefties, strikes out a lot overall. And so, yeah, well, I wouldn't have minded leaving Trace up to hit there. I understand the decision to pinch hit for him. I don't, I think letting Trace bat would have been a 48, so not quite your best option. I think pinch hitting for him then goes to about a 52. So then the question is, okay, are we going with Muncy or Lux? I would have gone with Gavin Lux, simply because this year Gavin Lux is a better hitter than Max Muncy. The arguments against that, Gavin Lux, even though he's been better against lefties this year than he has been in his previous major league years, he's still quite a bit worse against lefties than he is against righties. Max Muncy has been bad against everybody, but he has a history of going back several years of being good against lefties. And even this year, when he's been bad against everybody, his strikeout rate is actually quite a bit lower against lefties. Both of his sacrifice flies this year have come against lefties. He's hit 3 of his 8 home runs against lefties. He sees lefties okay. And so he also leads the Dodgers in walks. And while Max Muncy is probably a lot less likely than Gavin Lux to get a hit in that situation, you don't need a hit. A walk or a sac fly ties the game. And I think it was reasonably likely that Max Muncy was going to do one of those two things. In fact, he almost did both of those things. He almost walked, he almost hit a sac fly. And so I don't think it was unreasonable to think that he could have done one of those two things. Like I said, I would have gone with Lux in that situation. I think Lux is just as unlikely to strike out, probably less likely to hit into a double play, although even a double play, the Cardinals weren't playing infield in. Even a double play scores the tying run, but Lux has more speed than Muncy, so he's less likely to hit into a double play, more likely to get a hit that would score multiple runs, maybe a little less likely for the sacrifice fly. But, I would have gone with Lux. But I understand why Dave Roberts went with Max Muncy. As I've said before, the best version of this Dodgers team in October has an effective Max Muncy. And so you can't just give up on him in July. And this is a situation, especially knowing that you also have Hanser Alberto and Austin Barnes, who you might need to hit for later. They ended up using Gavin Lux to hit for Austin Barnes the next inning with nobody on base, leading off the inning. And, he got out. I understand. Yeah, I'd rather have Lux up with bases loaded and nobody out than nobody on and nobody out. But I think the idea of Muncy coming through isn't nearly as unfathomable as some of you has told me on Twitter. And I really do think, since we're only at 52% pinch hitting for Trace at all, then we're like, it's like 53 and a 51. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, maybe Lux and Muncy. Maybe Lux is the 55 choice and Muncy's the 45 choice. Maybe it's a little closer than that. I don't think it's much farther apart than that. And so I think my biggest takeaway is if you already thought Dave Roberts was a terrible manager, you think this is more evidence that he's a terrible manager. If you think he's a pretty solid manager and it's impossible, I don't know. Joe Torre was a terrible manager, had a terrible record as a manager. He managed the Mets and the Braves and the Cardinals. He was a below 500 manager, and then he came to the Yankees with the Hall of Famers and was really good. People say, well, anybody could win with the Dodgers roster. Yeah, anybody could win. Dave Roberts hasn't just won. He has the best winning percentage in managerial history. You cannot do that by accident. A lot of it is he's a great people manager. Best in baseball at people managing. Yes, sometimes his in-game managing isn't ideal. Usually it has to do with bullpen management. He does decisions where I think maybe he does fall on the 45 side of things once in a while. Not nearly as often as a lot of people think. But once you get it in your mind that he's a terrible manager, every time a 55 decision doesn't work, which is 45% of the time, you're going to see that as evidence that he's a terrible, terrible manager. I don't think this Max Muncy decision was evidence that he's a terrible manager. I'm going to come back in a minute. I'm going to talk about the David Price decision. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. Hey, do you want to be like the Dodgers and try to buy a ring? Well, you should go to BlueNile.com. whatever kind of jewelry you want to get, whether you just want a special occasion or even a not special occasion. Hey, it's Tuesday, honey. Here's some earrings. Or hey, will you marry me? Or hey, you already said you'll marry me. You want a wedding band? Any of those options, go to BlueNile.com. And if you're anything like me, maybe you're bad at shopping for jewelry. I'm really bad at shopping for jewelry. And one of the things I love about Blue Nile is they have jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Every budget, whatever your budget is, Blue Nile experts can help you find a memorable gift at that budget. It falls into every, so they can do it. So whatever jewelry you look for, whatever occasion it is, make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Use code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. All right, I'm back. There was one other questionable decision that Dave Roberts made, which was to bring David Price in to pitch the bottom of the 8th inning in a 6-5 game. It was the day after a day off, but it's also 2 days after the Dodgers had to use more pitchers than they had planned on, and maybe some situations they hadn't planned on. I don't know for sure who was available today. I don't know if Evan Phillips was available. If he was, he's probably a better decision for the 8th inning. But the fact is, David Price is on the roster, and you have 4 more games coming up before your next day off. Now, I know that doesn't seem like a lot, 5 games in a row. It's definitely too much for every pitcher to pitch. And the fact is, when you are laying out your bullpen, you have, here's guys I use in a close game that we're leading, and here's guys I use in a close game that we're not leading. There's a difference. One is to get a hold down the game, try to win the game. The other one is try to keep it close so the offense can have a chance. David Price falls into that second category. The Dodgers don't really have any relievers who are on the roster just to be mop-up guys. David Price is maybe the closest they have, but his stuff has been trending up lately. He wasn't good as last time out, but overall he's been probably better than people expected this year. And so, I think it makes sense knowing you have to play the next 4 days. You don't necessarily want to use Evan Phillips in that situation when he is kind of your setup guy. Evan Phillips and Bruce Dograt are all your setup guys to Craig Kimbrell right now. And you might need all 3 of those guys tomorrow. And if you use some of them today and then use them again tomorrow, well, then suddenly they're unavailable for the next game. It's you have to manage differently when you're behind, and you have to try to keep it close. And I think that's what they were hoping from David Price, and he didn't get the job done. But like most things in baseball, it comes down to the players getting the job done. If David Price can't be trusted to pitch, then he shouldn't be on the roster. And maybe that time is coming soon, whether it's by trades or guys coming back from injury or whatever. But the fact is, right now, David Price is on the roster. He has to pitch sometimes. And this was the situation that they had. And so I don't know that I would say it was the right decision, again, because I don't really believe in right and wrong very often for managerial decisions. But it was definitely defensible, and it made some decent sense. It didn't work out. He gave up the 1 run, which then when Freddie Freeman hit a home run in the top of the 9th inning, it meant that Freeman's home run just pulled them within 1 instead of tying the game. And yeah, that sucks. It was a bummer. But it wasn't a terrible decision. I don't know. Where Dave Roberts does struggle sometimes, I do believe most of his struggles as a manager do come in bullpen management. I'm not convinced that this was one of those. I think a lot of it goes back to what I was talking about in the last segment, that if you already thought Dave Roberts is a bad manager, this is more evidence of that. I think it was at least defensible, and without knowing the ins and outs of how everybody's arms were feeling today, Mitch White having to struggle through 5 innings, it was a rough game, and they had already used Bickford. They had already used, I guess, Alex Vesia was maybe an option, but David Price is on the roster to pitch, and it wasn't a terrible situation to put him in. I sometimes come across as a Dave Roberts apologist on this podcast. And maybe I am pushing back a little bit more than I normally would just because so many people do think he's the worst manager ever. And I really, truly believe to the point where I'd say I know you cannot be as successful as Dave Roberts has been uh, without being a decent manager. Yes, talent will take you far. Most games are won and lost by players, not by managers. But there have been a lot of talented teams. Miller Huggins had guys named Ruth and Gehrig on his team. His winning percentage, not as good as Dave Roberts. And before he went to those Yankees teams, he managed the Cardinals and was pretty bad. Their teams were bad. Joe Torre, I already mentioned. Uh, We'd have to see. People say, well, if you put Dave Roberts in the Rockies dugout, he wouldn't be as good. Of course not, because the Rockies aren't as talented team. I bet the Rockies would win a few more games than they do under Bud Black because Dave Roberts is a better manager than Bud Black. I said it. Okay. I don't think Dave Roberts is perfect, but I also don't think me saying this decision is defensible is the same thing as saying Dave Roberts is perfect. It's it, it's not nearly as black and white as a lot of people make it out to be. That's what I'm saying. So that's going to do it for me today. Vince is going to be along in a minute. He's going to talk maybe about more of the positives. Freddie Freeman had a great game. Maybe Vince will touch on that, and maybe we'll look forward to the rest of this series and series with the Angels, and hopefully the Dodgers can bounce back and win the last 4 games of this road trip, and we'll look back and say, oh, 4-1 road trip, not bad at all. So thanks for making Locked On Dodgers your first your first listen every day, and Vince will be along in a minute.
BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. For all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including MLB, BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Go check out their website today on your laptop or mobile device and see what you can find. All the latest news. They got some podcasts on there. They got some odds on there. They got everything you could need for your sports wagering life. They're the fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to the website today and learn more about the trends and learn more about the action. Bet online where the game starts. Yo, 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 Dodger fans. Vince here to take us the rest of the way on the episode, and got a couple of things to talk about, one being Freddie Freeman, and then 2, just an update on some injury stuff. So Freddie Freeman had 4 hits on Tuesday and was a bright spot for the Dodgers. Actually, the Dodgers 2, 3, 4 hitters. Trey Turner had the big 2-run home run. Freddie Freeman had a home run and 4 hits. Will Smith had 2 hits. Good job from the middle of the order, just wasn't enough to get it done. Mitch White struggled to get some outs, close out some innings, close out some hitters, and ultimately it was too much to come back from. But Freddie Freeman, we talked about how, he could have been an all-star snub, depending on how you see things, depending on how you feel about it. But one thing is now that if players are coming off the roster, Freddie Freeman and Will Smith to that extent should be some of the next ones that come onto the roster. And we saw one already where, and I'm not sure. We've seen in years past where if a player comes off, they don't necessarily have to replace him with the player of that position. Even on the pitching side, we saw Josh Hader not going to be able to pitch. Carlos Rodon was added to the National League roster. Starting pitcher, relief pitcher in an all-star game doesn't necessarily matter. But you could also argue that DH and any other position don't matter. And when Bryce Harper was not going to be able to play because he's hurt, Garrett Cooper from the Marlins was chosen to be the representative. And I read somewhere that it's because he was the next DH on the player voting, and that's how it made it. But, while I don't necessarily think Freddie Freeman was a snub off the original roster, I do think that once you're getting to this point where you're adding players and the position doesn't matter too much, I think Freddie Freeman was snubbed here. Garrett Cooper, not as good as Freddie Freeman in pretty much every category. Lower OPS plus, lower OPS, less doubles, less homers, less RBIs, lower batting average. other than the fact that he's played some DH more than Freddie Freeman. Freddie Freeman hasn't played any DH. I really don't, and even then Cooper's played 40, started 41 games at first base and started 34 games at DH. So even then he's not like a full-time DH. Just a weird decision, especially if they just say because of the fact of he was the next DH, maybe because Bryce Harper was a starter at the position, and maybe that's why they're replacing with the next position that he was. But even then, Freddie Freeman didn't get his due, and I don't know how many other position players are not going to be able to play. But yeah, that was. Now I can say Freddie Freeman was snubbed, at least when it comes to him over Garrett Cooper. And Garrett Cooper being an all-star over Freddie Freeman is just a weird premise to begin with. And you look at Freddie Freeman's numbers on the whole, 311 on the season, 897 OPS, 148 OPS plus, 28 doubles, 12 homers, 56 RBI. And you compare, kind of what he's projected to his career. And I've seen people say, "Oh, Freddie's having a down year." Braves fans mostly to deflect from the fact that things didn't go their way when it comes to Freddie. But when you look at the numbers, he's on pace for the most doubles he's ever had in a season. Yeah, his power is down a little bit. He's not on pace to break 30 home runs, and he has broke 30 home runs 3 times in his career before. Last year he did hit 31 home runs, but either way, RBI down a little bit, but he's also in a little bit more loaded lineup. So, and he can, RBIs are one where it's not necessarily always your fault. I mean, you can't really control if guys are on base when you're coming up to bat. And also it's one where you can start picking up RBI in bunches. Last year he had 120 RBI. He's on pace for just under or just over 100 for this season, I believe. But that's just the way it goes. But you look at the WAR, and he's for Fangraphs, he's at 3.7 WAR. Last year, 4.9 WAR. So he's on pace to pass that. He's on pace to have his second or third best year in WAR in total. He had 6.6 WAR back in 2016, 5 WAR in 2013, 3.7 through just over, halfway through the season. He's on pace to hit 5.56 WAR for sure. So as down as a year as some people might think Freddie Freeman's having, it's not that down as you may think. And we talked about Freddie Freeman a lot with the Brave stuff and with everything else. But ever since that's happened, I mean, he's really been one of the Dodgers' best hitters. He had been struggling right before that. But in the last month, Freddie Freeman's hitting 362 with a 1,007 OPS. He's got 7 homers and 22 RBIs in his last 26 games. It's something that, he's been the Dodgers' best hitter in the last month. And for a team with Mookie Betts and Trey Turner and Will Smith and guys like that, to be a team's best hitter over, a 30-game stretch is not something to blink at. That's a legitimate thing, especially him moving over to number 3 hole instead of the number 2 hole. I don't know if that makes a difference, but in the last 2 weeks he's hitting 345 with the 102 OPS, 4 homers, 10 RBI. So regardless of where he's been, batting third, batting second, he's been on fire lately, and he's been able to give that Dodgers offense the boost. And with Trey Turner hitting well, Will Smith hitting well, Mookie Betts coming back and hitting relatively well from injury, we see why the Dodgers have been winning, and we see why the Dodgers have been able to separate themselves in the division a little bit, and why they've been able to, have all these comebacks. I mean, yesterday they should have came back from another 5-run deficit. It just didn't quite work out when they had the runners in the right place, but probably the wrong hitters up. But it's one of those where, yeah, Freddie Freeman has been pretty much everything the Dodgers could have asked for when they signed him, and it's been fun to watch, and it will continue to be fun to watch. So salute to you, Freddie Freeman. Now I truly believe you got snubbed from the All-Star game, and if there's more people that don't end up playing on the position player side and you're not chosen, we'll continue to defend you in that honor. So yeah, that's where we're at on Freddie Freeman and the offense. And also just a shout out to Trey Turner for continuing to be the man. And Will Smith too. Will Smith needs to also be on the All-Star roster. They need to figure that out. So Let's move on to some injury updates. Andrew Heaney threw a simulated game on Tuesday in St. Louis. He threw 2 simulated innings, and now he's set to make a rehab start on July 16th, which is Friday or Saturday, one of those days. He's supposed to start for Ranch Cucamonga. He'll throw 3 or 4 innings and could be the only rehab start he needs before he comes back to join the Dodgers, although he more than likely is going to take 2 rehab outings. The one interesting thing that Dave Roberts said with Heaney is that he doesn't see it as realistic that Heaney will push past the 75 pitch mark in his starts. And that's one of those where he says, quote, I think with Andrew, it's the volume. I think we've got to do whatever we can to keep him healthy, because if he's on our roster and he's pitching, I think in a lot of different ways he can be helpful. That's interesting in the fact, if they're going to have him on a stricter pitch count when he's with the Dodgers, then it's one of those where, you have to adjust your bullpen. And, Jeff talked about David Price in the first half of the show. Maybe David Price doesn't make it past this point, although I've already written him off a couple times and he continues to remain on the roster. But maybe this is one where Price, doesn't make it on and Mitch White hangs around, and Mitch White kind of becomes a piggyback of sorts on the days that Heaney pitches. That's possible. A 75 pitch count this deep into the season with someone that's in your starting rotation, or even if it's around 75, even if they don't let them go past 90, that's still you're not playing. You're playing with fire a little bit, because if he's not efficient and you're getting 4 or 5 innings out of him, or more so on the 3 to 4 innings side of things, if he doesn't go well, now you're overworking your bullpen in that sense. Or you have somebody on the roster like a Mitch White maybe, who's serving a specific role and doesn't necessarily, if Mitch White has to throw 2 or 3 innings every 5 days, then yeah, maybe he can be useful as a reliever one other day in those next 4 days. But you're asking a lot out of Mitch White, and maybe something he's done before, but still may not be comfortable with, especially since he's been a starter most of this year. So we'll see what happens, with Heaney. But like I said, a healthy Heaney, the way he's been throwing this year, that lower pitch count, he still could he still could throw 5 or 6 innings, but it's a matter of when it doesn't go right. You're kind of, messing with, like I said, playing with fire a little bit, but we'll see what happens. The other one is Blake Trinan, who we haven't given an update on in a while. He threw a 30-pitch bullpen session last week. Robert said it was good. Didn't have any definitive timetable for his return, but I believe he threw again after that bullpen session, and once again was feeling good and looking good. So it's a matter of, don't expect him back before the month of August, but it seems realistically that we could expect him back in the month of August rather than at the end of the month of August. So that's going to be a big boost if they can get him back and he's healthy. Obviously, the loss of Daniel Hudson was tough, and with Craig Kimbrell still struggling, and Blake Trinan would be, a welcome addition to the bullpen. Not that the bullpen has been bad, but you add Blake Trinan to the bullpen, that pushes Evan Phillips down a little bit, and then, or, keeps him on equal footing with Trinan if they try to ease him in. Now you got Trinan and Phillips as those guys that can get you the biggest outs of the game. You got Kimbrell to focus on the ninth and focus on himself in order to be the best version of himself. And that pushes, Gratterall and Vesia and guys like that into a little bit lower leverage roles, and really strengthens your bullpen all around. So Blake Trinan can come back. That would be the ideal situation. So those are the updates on the injury front there. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. Check out Locked On MLB Prospects with host Lindsey Crosby. He's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. Free and available wherever you get podcasts. If you want to find us, we are wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube. All you got to do is search for Locked On Dodgers. If you search for Locked On Dodgers on Twitter and Instagram, you'll also find us there. So check us out there. You can find Jeff on Twitter at Snider. I'm at Vince Samperio. If you want to call and leave us a voicemail or send us a text, you can do so at 323-863-5625. or you can send us an email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us. When you get in your car or if you're at home, check Smart Device Play Podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.